The call came in at 5:42 a.m. A backcountry hiker named Paul Dinsmore had spotted what looked like a lifeless bear sprawled beside the edge of a glacial stream in Montana's Absaroka-Beartooth wilderness. He'd seen grizzlies from a distance before, always moving, always commanding, but this one hadn't moved in hours. From 80 feet away through mist and pine, it looked more like a fallen log than one of North America's most powerful wild animals. At first, Paul thought it had been shot, but there were no signs of a struggle. No carcass scavenging, no blood trails in the snowmelt mud. Just a single massive grizzly bear motionless alone and unnervingly still. By 8 a.m., the rescue team had mobilized. Jenna Lawson, a wildlife vet with over 2 decades of field experience, climbed into the flatbed of a Forest Service truck beside Ranger Eli Turner and wildlife behaviorist Sam Brooks. They didn't talk much during the drive. Everyone in that truck had dealt with wounded wildlife before. But grizzlies. In spring, that was different. These bears had just emerged from hibernation, thin, hungry, unpredictable. A grizzly could flip a 300-pound dumpster with one paw. If this one were injured and agitated, the team would be risking their lives to get within 50 feet. The road up to Raven's Hollow, where the sighting was reported, was more rock than trail. It ended in a patch of soft earth scattered with moose tracks and early blooms. From there, the team hiked in silence. As the canopy opened, they saw him. The bear lay near the base of a craggy outcrop surrounded by sedge grass and snow-fed water. At first glance, he did look lifeless. His back rose and fell slowly, shallowly. A small patch of reddish fur near his front shoulder hinted at blood, but it wasn't fresh. A wound, yes, but not fatal. Eli raised his binoculars. "No scavengers around," he muttered. "No birds, no coyotes. That's not normal." Sam stepped forward slowly, stopping about 30 yards out. His body position, she said more to herself than to the others. "It's protective. Look at how he's curled. That's not how bears rest when they're dying." Jenna lowered herself to one knee, observing. The bear's head wasn't flat on the ground. It was raised just slightly, nostrils flaring, watching, sensing, not surrendering. Then he blinked. Just once, slow and deliberate. "There's still fight in him," Jenna said quietly. "He's not out. He's choosing to stay down." Sam shifted uneasily. But why? Why hasn't he moved? An injured bear wouldn't just lie here unless... She trailed off. Eli spoke what none of them wanted to voice. "Unless he's guarding something." That single observation shifted everything. If this grizzly was defending something, getting close wasn't just risky, it was possibly lethal. They had to recalibrate. He wasn't helpless. He was alert, focused. They watched in silence for 10 long minutes. Not a twitch, not a growl. But then the wind shifted slightly, and the bear's ears flicked back. His massive shoulders shifted a subtle, nearly imperceptible turn, and then for the briefest moment, he lowered his head and gently nudged something beneath his chest. Something soft, something that moved. Jenna exhaled sharply. There's something under him. From this distance, it could have been anything, a small animal, a food stash, a wounded cub. But Sam's face was pale. "That wasn't a paw," she whispered. "That looked like a cloth." Jenna turned her gaze back toward the bear. His body curved protectively like a mountain shielded whatever lay underneath. The way he'd folded himself wasn't instinctual. It was architectural, purposeful. "There's no way," Eli murmured. "Not a chance." But even as the words left his mouth, a quiet truth settled over the team like the morning fog around their boots. This wasn't normal. Not even close. There was a lesson in that moment, one you don't learn from books or documentaries. You learn it in the stillness between one breath and the next, where nature doesn't roar or rumble, but simply holds. In that space, the grizzly wasn't a beast. He was something else. A wall, a shield, a choice. And sometimes the wild doesn't speak in words. It speaks in silence. In wildlife rescue, most situations follow patterns. Hurt animals flee. Predators protect food or offspring. There are behaviors and protocols. But occasionally something happens that scrambles every rule in the manual. That's when instinct gives way to awe. That's when science has to pause and make room for mystery. As they stayed still trying to read the scene, the silence stretched. Sam adjusted the tranquilizer rifle on her back, but Jenna raised a hand. "No drugs," she said. "Not yet. I need more information. If we tranquilize and he falls the wrong way..." She didn't finish the sentence. They knew. There was weight under his frame, not just physical, but emotional. He wasn't trying to escape or defend a territory. He was choosing to stay, in pain, in exposure, in absolute stillness. That decision, one that no textbook could predict, made Jenna's next words feel like a prayer. "I think he's protecting something alive." Sam looked over sharply. "You mean a cub?" Jenna shook her head. "No, his behavior doesn't match. He's not vocalizing like he would to comfort a cub. He's being gentle, calculated. The pieces weren't adding up. The grizzly wasn't aggressive. He wasn't fleeing. He wasn't feeding. He was guarding with intent. Eli took a cautious step forward and the bear's eyes locked with his. No growl, no lunge, just a deep, unblinking stare. That kind of gaze doesn't come from instinct alone. It comes from recognition, from purpose. And this wasn't just wildlife anymore, it was well. "I've seen a lot out here," Eli said softly. "Predators, fights, even orphaned cubs, but I've never seen a grizzly do this." It felt sacred almost, a scene that demanded reverence. A massive wounded bear lying silent in the wild, not out of defeat, but out of choice. A choice to protect. Back at base, if you showed someone this scene, they'd assume the bear was dying. If you asked a zoologist, they'd say it was an anomaly. But if you stood there, smelled the pine, felt the low hum of the earth, and saw the way that bear pressed his weight downward without crushing it, didn't feel like chance. It felt like a message. Jenna whispered it out loud. "He's not just a grizzly. He's a guardian." The wind shifted again. A faint sound, high-pitched, human, whimpered beneath the bear's chest. A soft cry, weak but unmistakable. The air thickened. None of them moved. Not because they were afraid, but because they finally understood what they were seeing. This was no ordinary encounter in the wild. This was something history might forget, but the heart would never. Somewhere beneath 600 pounds of fur muscle and instinct was a secret, and it had just made a sound. As the sun crested the ridgeline, casting gold across the alpine valley, Jenna stepped forward. She didn't raise her voice or draw a tranquilizer. She simply said the only thing that made sense in that moment. "We're not here to hurt you," she murmured, "but we need to see what you're protecting." She took one more step. The bear didn't move. He just blinked. Slow, steady, trusting. The kind of blink that says, "I see you, but I have a duty." That was the moment it changed from a rescue to a revelation. And what lay beneath him would challenge everything they thought they knew about animal behavior, about connection, about the boundaries between wild and human. Because this grizzly bear, wounded and alone in the Montana wilderness, was not the one being saved. He was the one doing the saving. In most wildlife encounters, there's a silent rule. You don't get close to a grizzly bear and the grizzly doesn't let you. It's a mutual understanding built on millions of years of evolution. Especially when that bear is wounded. Especially when that bear should be running. But this bear didn't. The morning sun had barely risen above the peaks when Jenna, Sam, and Eli stood just 30 yards away from a fully grown grizzly, injured, breathing heavily, bleeding from the shoulder, and still he stayed. He didn't charge, didn't snarl, but also didn't move. "He should be gone by now," Sam said under her breath. She knew the data. Grizzly bears, when injured, almost always retreat limping into thick brush-up slopes behind fallen timber. Their first instinct is flight. They'll travel miles to escape human scent, even if it means dragging a broken limb. It's biology. It's survival. But this one, He held his ground like a soldier on a mission. And it wasn't because he couldn't move. Jenna had already spotted signs of mobility, the subtle repositioning of his weight, the twitch of muscle near his hind leg. He was hurt, but not paralyzed. He chose to stay. That changed everything. "I think he's waiting for us to leave," Eli said. Sam disagreed. "No, he's watching, not waiting." There's a difference. That difference mattered. It suggested an intention. Focus. Even dare they say it, judgment. In wildlife behavior, there are certain truths. Grizzlies are solitary by nature. They guard their young ferociously, but they don't bond with other species. They don't linger near humans unless provoked. And they certainly don't allow people to get this close, especially not while injured. But as the three crouched in the brush, they began to realize they weren't witnessing wild instinct anymore. They were witnessing something more layered. "He's assessing us," Jenna said. "That's why he hasn't moved." There was no panic in his posture, no fear, just a deep, watchful calm. Every few minutes, he'd lower his head slowly toward his body, then raise it again, always with precision, always with care. Like a father checking on a newborn, not a bear protecting meat or wounded kin. Sam's voice softened. "Whatever's under there, it's not his, but he's treating it like it is." It's a difficult thing to explain to people who've never looked into the eyes of a wild animal. But for those who've spent years in the field, who've sat still long enough, quietly enough to be trusted by the forest, it's unmistakable. There's a moment when instinct breaks. When something ancient steps aside and you see decision in the eyes of a creature most believe acts only on reflex. This bear had made a decision, and it wasn't to run. Jenna motioned for the others to stay behind. She took off her gloves and moved forward slowly, crouching to lower her profile. 10 feet, then 8. At 5 feet, the bear exhaled long and low, not in warning, but in recognition. "I'm not here to hurt you," she whispered. Still no movement. She dropped to one knee. Slowly extended a hand, not toward him, but toward the earth beside him. Then for the first time, he moved deliberately. A shift of weight, a tightening of the muscle. He wasn't preparing to strike. He was bracing. Then came the sound again, a soft whimpering cry from beneath his torso. Faint, fragile, human. This wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't a random choice. This grizzly had found something in the wild, a baby. And instead of ignoring it, or walking away, or reacting with fear, he had stayed. And not just stayed, guarded, sheltered, kept her alive. Sam finally spoke what had been sitting on all their lips. He's not being a bear right now. He's being something else. In that quiet field tucked between pine trees and ridgelines, their definitions of wild and civilized started to blur. Science has long said that animals operate on instinct, and much of that is true. But there's growing research, especially among wildlife behaviorists and neurobiologists, that shows animals, particularly mammals, are capable of acts beyond pure reflex. Empathy, protection, even moral choice. Dr. Lila Hammond, a neuroscientist from the University of Colorado, has studied memory imprinting in baby mammals and the response of non-kin adults in trauma events. She once described a case of a captive elephant shielding an injured antelope with her body for days. Empathy, she said, isn't human, it's mammalian. This grizzly alone in the Montana wilderness was acting on something more profound than instinct. He'd seen a fragile life and chosen to become its protector. He defied every rule in the book, every chart, every case study. And that made him dangerous, but also extraordinary. The lesson here isn't that all wild animals are secretly soft-hearted saviors. Most aren't. Most will do exactly what they were wired to do. But some, in moments we may never fully understand, choose something else. Something nobler. Something that suggests the wild has a conscience, even if we can't always measure it. That's what Jenna saw in his eyes that morning. Not a threat, not a challenge. A request. Help her, his silence seemed to say. But only if I trust you. The baby was still under him. They couldn't see her clearly, not yet, but now they knew. And more than that, they felt it. This wasn't about territory or food. This was about trust. But trust comes with time. And the bear was running out of it. His breathing was growing labored. His side, coated in dried blood, rose and fell erratically. The wound near his shoulder was worsening, possibly infected. If he collapsed, he'd crush what he was trying to protect. If they acted too soon, they could trigger panic and endanger the baby. Jenna made the call. We need to act, but we do it his way. Not with force, not with drugs, but with understanding. They needed to show him they weren't predators, that they respected the line he had drawn, that they weren't here to steal what he was guarding, but to carry forward what he had already begun, the act of saving her. Sam nodded. Then we wait, and we let him decide. It was a reversal of roles. The wild wasn't the threat. It was the teacher. And the lesson was this. Sometimes survival isn't just about escaping danger. Sometimes it's about standing your ground when every bone in your body says run. This bear should have fled, but he didn't, because what lay beneath him mattered more than his pain. In a world where so much is governed by instinct, his stillness spoke of something greater. The fresh perspective, the one we don't talk about enough, is that protection, real sacrificial protection, isn't exclusive to humans. It exists in nature too. It may be rare. It may defy expectation, but it's real. And when we witness it, it changes us. As the team set up a perimeter and radioed for emergency backup, Jenna sat cross-legged in the grass, 5 feet from the most dangerous animal in North America, and watched him continue to do something no science paper had ever prepared her for. He stayed, bleeding, breathing, guarding. Not because he had to, but because he chose to. And that one choice in a canyon of trees and silence would lead them deeper into a story none of them could have imagined. No one breathed. Not Jenna, crouched low in the brush, with her stethoscope gripped tight in her hand. Not Sam, who had gone silent minutes ago, binoculars fixed on the shifting shadow beneath the bear. Not Eli, fingers frozen around the grip of his field camera. Because when the bear moved just slightly, just enough, it confirmed what none of them were ready to believe. It wasn't a cub. It wasn't prey. It was a baby. Wrapped in a soft pink blanket, the kind you see in hospital nurseries. The kind that smells faintly of laundry detergent and something even softer, love. She was impossibly small beneath the massive body of the wounded grizzly, tucked against his chest as if she belonged there, as if she'd been placed by nature itself into the safest place it could find. The grizzly shifted again, slow, careful, nudging her gently with his snout. And then, incredibly, the baby moved. A small arm reached up, grasping air. A tiny foot kicked once, then settled. She was alive. Jenna's first instinct was to rush forward, but instinct had no place here. This wasn't a typical wildlife rescue. This was something else. Something that had already rewritten the rules. "How?" Sam murmured. "How is she alive?" Eli shook his head. "She's been here at least 12 hours, maybe more. No food, no warmth except him." That was the part none of them could wrap their minds around. Grizzly bears are powerful, territorial wild animals, and yet this one, injured and alone, had not only refused to abandon a human infant, he had shielded her with his own body, conserved his heat, kept predators away, risked death to keep her safe. And now, against all odds, she was still breathing. Jenna looked at the scene not just through the eyes of a veterinarian, but as a mother. She knew the signs of dehydration, of exposure. She knew that in these temperatures and this terrain, the child should have succumbed hours ago. But she hadn't, because of him. The grizzly had acted as a wall, a roof, a guardian. It wasn't just a rescue, it was protection, pure and deliberate. There's a phrase often used in wildlife rescue intervention: without interference. It means respecting the line between helping and harming, between doing enough and doing too much. That line had never been thinner than it was now. They couldn't separate the two without risk. They couldn't wait much longer either. "We need to get her out," Jenna said softly. "But if we move wrong—" Sam didn't let her finish. "He'll think we're a threat, and he'll protect her, even from us." Which begged a question none of them had ever had to ask. How do you rescue a child from her protector when her protector is a 600-pound injured bear? Jenna dropped into a seated position, lowering her posture further. She took off her radio, her gloves, everything that might seem aggressive. "We need him to see we're not competition, that we're not trying to take her. We're here to carry on what he started." The bear watched her carefully, head low, eyes locked. She began talking not with authority, but with something gentler. Not baby talk, not commands, just presence. "You've done so well," she whispered. "You've kept her safe. We see that, and we're grateful. It wasn't a strategy from a field manual. It was human instinct meeting animal instinct in the only language they might both understand: reverence." He blinked, then lowered his head to the baby and made a low sound, not a growl, but a kind of soft rumble. A comforting vibration, the kind mother bears used to soothe cubs. The baby stirred, then quieted. It was the sound she knew. The bear raised his head again, and for the first time Jenna saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before in a wild animal permission. Slowly, Jenna crawled forward on her hands and knees. The bear didn't flinch. He stayed completely still, his chest rising and falling like a steady drum beat. She reached the edge of the blanket. Her fingers touched the fabric. The baby's skin was cool but not cold. Her cheeks were pink, not blue. Her eyelids fluttered. She was dehydrated, yes. Weak, but alive and responsive. "I've got her," Jenna said into her mic voice, barely above her breath. Vitals are faint but present. With the utmost care, she lifted the baby into her arms. The grizzly watched every movement. His eyes didn't leave the child, not for a second. And when Jenna stepped back, slowly cradling the infant against her chest, the bear lowered his head to the ground. Not in defeat, not in surrender. In relief. He exhaled a sound deep and final, and then for the first time closed his eyes. Sam stepped forward with a thermal blanket and a bottle. Eli moved to document the scene with the long lens camera. The moment had to be recorded. Not for proof, but for memory. Because one day that baby would need to know what had saved her. And it wasn't just luck, it was love. Not the human kind, necessarily. But the kind that crosses species. The kind that doesn't need words or reason. The kind that shows up when it's needed without expectation of reward. Jenna handed the baby off to Sam, who began checking vitals and preparing her for the helicopter evac. Then Jenna turned back to the bear, still lying in the grass. His breathing was shallower now. The adrenaline was fading. The fight was ebbing. "Now it's your turn," Jenna whispered. "You've done enough. Let us take care of you." But as they prepared the sedative, she already knew this bear had given everything. The small lesson in that moment wasn't about wildlife. It was about guardianship. That sometimes protection doesn't come from the place we expect. Sometimes it's not the parent, the police, or the system. Sometimes it's a wounded, wild soul doing the unthinkable, holding still when every instinct screams to run. And it reminded them that compassion isn't a language reserved for humans. It's a response that lives in the bones, even grizzly bones. Eli, filming the bear's stillness, finally broke the silence. How do we even begin to explain this? Jenna looked at the baby. Her tiny hand curled around Sam's finger, and then at the bear, whose body still curved in the shape of protection. "We don't," she said. "We let the story speak for itself." They would name the baby Ellie. They would name the bear Kodiak. And the impossible moment where their lives touched would echo far beyond this Montana valley. But the mystery hadn't yet been solved. How did a 6-month-old baby end up alone in the wilderness? Who left her? And why? And how did Kodiak, a grizzly born of instinct and solitude, become her guardian? Those answers would come some painfully, some beautifully. For now, there was one truth that mattered more than the rest. She had survived. Because a grizzly bear made a choice. No one just ends up in the middle of the Absaroka-Beartooth wilderness, not a baby, not by accident. The terrain alone is too unforgiving. Steep ridgelines, unstable shale, freezing temperatures at night even in spring. It takes planning effort or desperation to reach that deep into the wild. So once the baby Ellie was safe in medical hands and the bear Kodiak was sedated for treatment, the question that loomed wasn't just how she survived. It was how she got there at all. Eli found the first clue before the air rescue crew even touched down. Tire tracks narrow-angled in awkwardly through a soft clearing about a quarter-mile uphill. Fresh. Within 48 hours old. No obvious signs of a campsite, no food wrappers, no diaper bag, no attempt to shelter. Just tracks leading in and leading out. He followed the trail until it disappeared into overgrown brush near a closed fire road. There were no security cameras in the area, no marked trailheads. Whoever left her there hadn't wanted to be found, and whoever it was had picked a place far off-grid, almost like they were trying to hide her. Sheriff's deputies arrived by mid-afternoon. Deputy Lauren Kim, no stranger to wilderness cases, took point. She was quiet, methodical, and almost immediately honed in on one word no one wanted to say out loud: abandonment. "It's possible the person who left her meant to come back," she said, "but that doesn't change the fact that this was a life-threatening situation." Jenna didn't argue. She couldn't. She kept thinking about the baby's skin temperature, her chapped lips, and the way her arms didn't move much until warmth returned. Ellie had been near the edge, and yet she had survived. Protected by a grizzly bear who had every reason not to care. So now there were two mysteries. How did she get there, and why did he stay? Over the next 24 hours, pieces started falling into place. News of the baby's discovery made local headlines by nightfall. A few fuzzy images from Eli's camera Kodiak lying curved around Ellie spread online with captions like "The Guardian Grizzly" and "Miracle in the Mountains." The next morning, a tip came in from a clerk at a grocery store in Red Lodge. A young woman had come in 2 days prior, shaken, asking if anyone knew how to get up into the ridge without being seen. She bought formula and water paid in cash. No car seat, no ID, just a sense of urgency and fear. By noon, deputies had traced her back to a motel on the outskirts of town. Empty now, but in the trash, a receipt for formula, a printed photo of a baby girl, and a page torn from a notebook. Just one sentence scribbled with a shaking hand: "I couldn't let him find her." Her name was Rachel Martinez, 19 years old, single mother. No history of violence, no record, but recent reports had her involved with a man known to local law enforcement, domestic disputes, narcotics, intimidation. The kind of fear that doesn't leave a mark on paper but lives deep in the bones. Rachel had panicked. She ran, and in that panic she'd done something that feels on its face unforgivable. She left her child, her 6-month-old baby girl, alone in a national forest. No note, no help, no plan. Just the distant hope that someone or something might find her before it was too late. But what she didn't count on was a bear. Kodiak's decision to stay defied everything the rescue team thought they knew. It wasn't just that he didn't flee, it's why he didn't. Grizzly bears are wired for survival. When they're wounded, they isolate. When threatened, they fight or escape. And yet, here was one who had curled his body around a child not his own and endured hunger pain and exhaustion to keep her safe. Sam offered a possible explanation rooted in behavioral science. "Bears, like most mammals, have deeply embedded parental instincts," she explained. "But those instincts are almost always species-specific. What Kodiak did, it crosses that line. It's not parental, it's protective. And we rarely see that in the wild. But even rare doesn't mean impossible." Sam cited a known case in 2005 of a lioness in Kenya who adopted a baby antelope and protected it from other predators for days. Or Binti Jua, the gorilla, who shielded a fallen human child at the Brookfield Zoo. In both cases, an animal stepped outside its instincts and chose empathy. Kodiak had done the same. There's a quiet lesson here that lingers longer than facts ever could. We assume that survival is selfish, that wild animals live by tooth and claw, never crossing the bounds of their kind. But that's not always true. Sometimes protection isn't a function of biology. It's a choice. A decision made not with logic, but with heart. And when a 600-pound grizzly chose stillness over flight, pain over safety, presence over escape, he wasn't just behaving against instinct. He was choosing something bigger: responsibility. The mystery behind Kodiak's behavior may never be fully understood. Maybe it was scent he detected vulnerability. Maybe it was the infant's crying activating a dormant nurturing reflex. Maybe it was a chance, or maybe it was compassion. "I've spent most of my life treating wild animals," Jenna said in a later interview, "but I've never seen one offer himself as shelter." It wasn't a fluke. It was deliberate. Even more telling, Kodiak hadn't shown signs of aggression, not toward Jenna, not toward Sam, not even when they took Ellie from beneath him. It wasn't a submission. It was surrender of control, not of care. He had done good, and now he trusted someone else to finish what he started. Rachel Martinez was eventually located trying to cross into Idaho. She didn't resist arrest. When she was told her daughter was alive, she collapsed onto the floor in tears. "I didn't know what else to do," she said. "He said, if I didn't leave her, he'd take her from me. I thought if I got far enough, if I could figure something out, I'd come back." Her case triggered a wave of responses online, some harsh, some compassionate. But one thing was clear: Rachel hadn't left Ellie to die. She had left her in fear, in flight. A mistake, yes. A crime, possibly. But it had come from desperation, not malice. And the one who understood that best was a bear. That's what stayed with Sam the most in the weeks after. Kodiak didn't know what fear made her do, but he knew the baby needed protection, and he chose to be that protection. In a way, Kodiak filled a gap that no one else could. Not by accident, not by training, but by instinct refined into intention. The fresh perspective here isn't about survival. It's about intervention. Not all protectors are human. Not all guardians live in houses or wear uniforms. Some walk on four legs, some live in forests, and some appear only when no one else will. Ellie's journey into the forest began in fear, but it didn't end there. It ended in the arms of a wounded grizzly who chose to stay, and that choice, not her abandonment, will define her story. Ellie was safe. For now. After 36 hours in the wilderness, the infant had been medevaced to Bozeman Children's Hospital. Her condition was fragile but stable. She'd been warmed, rehydrated, and monitored around the clock. Nurses said she barely cried. She seemed calm, soothed by the sound of low-frequency vibrations, almost as if she was still listening for Kodiak. Back in the Absaroka-Beartooth wilderness, the rescue team wasn't celebrating, because the bear who'd kept her alive was now hanging on by a thread. Kodiak's injuries were worse than they'd hoped. The laceration across his left shoulder, likely from a sharp rock or an old trap, had turned septic. His breathing was shallow. He'd lost weight, and worst of all, he still refused to rest. Every time Jenna's team approached with medical equipment, he stirred. Not aggressively, but with the kind of caution that said, "I'm not done yet." They had sedated him once, just long enough to lift Ellie from under his chest. But since waking, he hadn't accepted care. He hadn't eaten. He barely moved. Sam watched him through the scope of her binoculars from the observation point. "He's waiting." For what Eli asked. "I don't think he knows yet, but something in him still thinks he needs to protect her." That was the problem. Kodiak didn't know the baby was safe. To him, she had simply vanished, taken, perhaps. He'd held his ground for days, guarded her with everything he had, and now, silence. No wonder he was resisting. He wasn't in recovery. He was still on duty. That made the situation dangerous. They couldn't sedate him again without risking his heart. They couldn't approach without risking his panic. And if he collapsed from exhaustion, suddenly, violently, the fall alone could kill him. The irony was painful. The very instinct that had saved Ellie's life was now threatening his own, so Jenna made a controversial call. "We have to show him she's okay." Sam turned. "You mean bring her back?" "No," Jenna said gently. "Not the baby, but something of hers. Something with her scent, her sound. Something that tells him his job is done." Eli looked doubtful. "You think a grizzly will respond to that?" "I think this one might." It wasn't science. Not yet. But it wasn't guesswork either. There are studies on scent association in mammals, even cross-species. Dogs can recognize human family members after months apart. Horses respond to the voices of foals, not their own. Bears have shown remarkable memory when it comes to territory, food, and even individual threats. But emotional recognition, that was uncharted territory. Still, they had nothing to lose. Sam made the call to the hospital. The staff agreed to send a blanket, Ellie's original pink one, unwashed. It arrived that night by helicopter, folded neatly, lightly soiled, still warm with scent. Jenna didn't wait for morning. She stepped into the field before sunrise. Kodiak was lying on his side, eyes half-lidded. He didn't stir when she approached. He looked exhausted, not defeated, just finished. Jenna knelt 5 feet away. Slowly, deliberately, she laid the blanket in front of him. No sudden movement, no sound. Then she sat down beside it and waited. Minutes passed. Then, with an effort that looked like it took everything he had left, Kodiak lifted his head. His nose twitched once, twice, then again. He caught the scent, and in that moment, something shifted. He rose not all the way, but enough to crawl forward. He nudged the blanket with his snout. He inhaled deeply, slowly. He made a sound deep in his chest, softer than a growl, heavier than a sigh. Then he lay down again, this time on the blanket. And for the first time since Ellie had been taken, he closed his eyes and truly rested. Sam whispered from her watch point, "He understands." It wasn't a human understanding. It wasn't intellectual, but it was real. Kodiak, on some primal, mysterious level, knew she was okay. He'd passed her on. Now he could let go. The team moved in quietly. The sedation was gentle this time, just enough to help him sleep deeply. Jenna cleaned the wound. Sam administered antibiotics. Eli monitored vitals. They placed telemetry around his neck to track his movement. No fencing, no cages. This wasn't captivity. It was care. They didn't want to relocate him, not yet. His territory was here, his instincts, his rhythm. They didn't want to strip him of the one thing he still had: freedom. So they built the treatment center around him. Over the next 5 days, they brought in high-protein food, clean water, shade, heat lamps. He began to heal not just physically, but mentally. He stopped scanning the ridge. He stopped pacing. His body relaxed. Still, there were debates. Some wanted him moved to a sanctuary. Others feared releasing him back into the wild, so close to a human encounter. There were legal considerations. After all, he'd been part of a case involving an abandoned child. But as Jenna told the press in a quiet, firm voice, Kodiak didn't harm a soul. He did what no one else could. He kept a baby alive. That distinction mattered. He wasn't a threat. He was a protector. The small lesson here isn't about rescue. It's about reciprocity. For days, Kodiak had protected a child, not his own. Not for survival, not for reward, but because something in him responded to her vulnerability. And now it was their turn. They owed him more than thanks. They owed him safety, the fresh perspective. It's that healing doesn't always begin with sedatives or surgeries. Sometimes it begins with being seen, recognized, told that your burden can now be shared. That's what Jenna did when she laid that blanket before Kodiak. She told him, "You did your part, now let us do ours." And he believed her. One afternoon, as the sun dipped below the ridgeline, Kodiak stood on all fours and walked. Not far, just a few yards past the treatment zone. He sniffed the air, looked toward the valley, then sat down facing west. Sam stood beside Jenna, watching from a distance. "He's not leaving yet," Sam said. "No," Jenna replied. "He's waiting for her, even if he doesn't see her again. Part of him still wants to know she's close." Sam nodded. "And maybe someday she will be." Because what they couldn't yet imagine was what would happen when Ellie returned, when the child came back to the wilderness. Not as a rescue, but as family. By the end of the week, the world knew his name, not Kodiak, the field ID Jenna and the team had given him. That name remained on the tracking collar, the vet records, the case files. But to the public, he became something else, something bigger. They called him Thunder. The nickname started on social media. A photo of the bear curled around baby Ellie, posted by a local reporter, had been shared 2.3 million times in 48 hours. The caption was simple. "The mountain stayed still so a child could live. This is Thunder, Montana's silent guardian." From there, it snowballed. Thunder. Bear trended in 14 countries. Wildlife photographers begged for access to the canyon. National outlets covered the story in breathless segments. The grizzly who loved a baby, wild hero, or dangerous myth. Proof that animals have souls, and with every headline, every repost, the lines blurred. What began as a quiet act of protection deep in the Absaroka-Beartooth wilderness had become something else entirely, public property. Jenna sat in her clinic office, watching a morning segment flash across the television. A panel debated whether Thunder should be nominated for a Heroic Animal Award. One anchor wept on camera, another questioned the facts. Sam muted the screen. This is getting out of control. It wasn't the story itself that bothered them, it was how fast it had become a symbol. For some, Thunder represented the goodness still left in the world. For others, he was proof that wild animals could feel empathy, even love. And for a few critics, he was a dangerous, romanticized fantasy. A 600-pound grizzly bear was now the face of compassion. But what did he think of all this? Nothing, of course. He didn't know he was famous. He didn't understand what it meant to go viral. He didn't know his name had been turned into hashtags, headlines, even embroidered on sweatshirts. He only knew that the baby was gone, and he was still waiting. By the second week, things had gotten louder. A petition to grant Thunder protected individual status had gathered over 500,000 signatures. Another called for him to be relocated to a sanctuary where he could live out his life in peace, away from human intrusion. Meanwhile, a different camp, mostly ranchers and rural residents, argued he should be released untagged into deeper wilderness. One Montana congressman even suggested that the bear had fulfilled his role, and that continued government protection was anthropomorphizing wildlife to a dangerous degree. The Forest Service was flooded with emails. Local news vans arrived in Red Lodge. Drone operators circled the canyon until officials blocked the airspace. And through it all, Jenna kept doing the same thing she'd done from the beginning, feeding, monitoring, observing. She didn't speak at press conferences. She avoided interviews. She just stayed near the bear, who had done something no one could explain. Sam, however, spoke up. In one nationally televised interview, she said calmly but firmly, "You're asking the wrong questions. It's not about what we should do with Thunder. It's about what he showed us about who we are." In quiet corners of the internet, other stories began to surface. One woman posted about her childhood cat, who once lay on her chest all night when she had pneumonia at age 5. A man in Oregon shared how a wild black bear had shadowed him during a solo hike after he got injured, never attacking, never leaving. These weren't proof, but they were signals, small reminders that the animal world isn't always cold or cruel. Sometimes it watches and waits and steps in. Still, not everyone was convinced. A prominent wildlife biologist went on record. "It's irresponsible to assign human emotion to this bear. He may have been drawn to the warmth, the smell, or simply confused. That doesn't make him a guardian. It makes him unpredictable." Jenna read the quote 3 times before turning off her phone. Maybe it was true. Maybe Thunder's act wasn't love. Maybe it wasn't empathy. But maybe, just maybe, It didn't matter what word you used, only what happened. There was a lesson in the frenzy hidden beneath the noise. It came not from the opinions or the coverage, but from Thunder himself. Because while humans argued over what to do, he stayed in the same spot. Resting, healing, watching the sky every time a helicopter passed, as if wondering when the baby would return. He hadn't moved more than a few miles from the site where Ellie had been taken. Eli noticed it first, flipping through the GPS logs. "He's circling," he said. "Small perimeter, never leaves the valley." Sam nodded. He's still on watch, not because he was wild, but because he remembered. The fresh perspective here wasn't about the bear. It was about us. About how quickly we claim things that inspire us. About how much we want heroes, even if they're covered in fur. About how easily we turn awe into arguments. Thunder didn't need a medal. He didn't need an opinion piece. He needed space, and maybe one day a sign that what he did had meaning. It came quietly. A week after the media storm peaked, a letter arrived at Jenna's clinic. No return address, no signature. Just one small note handwritten in tight, careful letters. "Please tell the bear." "Thank you. I think he forgave me before I did." Taped to the letter was a drawing, a child's crayon sketch of a bear with a baby in its arms. The name Ellie was scrawled in pink across the bottom. Rachel. No one knew where she was, but her words said enough. And in that small act of gratitude, the story circled back, not to fame, not to judgment, but to healing. The team agreed on a decision. Thunder would stay in the wilderness, but a small observation facility would be built nearby, unobtrusive, safe, staffed only by Jenna's team. No tourists, no tours, just watchful care. He would be free, but not forgotten. The media attention faded as it always does. A new headline rose, a new scandal broke. People moved on, but in the mountains, Thunder remained. He never roared for attention. He never asked to be noticed. He simply made a choice, and that choice echoed farther than even his mighty paws could carry. He reminded a restless, doubting world that sometimes protection doesn't roar. It waits, it stays, it shelters. And if you listen closely beneath the noise of trending tags and viral videos, you can still hear it, the steady rhythm of a bear who became something more than wild. Not because we said so, but because he did. Ellie was different now. 3 months had passed since the day Thunder sheltered her in the wilderness. She'd grown stronger, sitting up on her own, reaching for things, babbling with more intent. Her health had stabilized, but something still didn't feel complete. The pediatric team noticed it first. She wasn't bonding well in foster care. She rarely smiled. She cried sometimes inconsolably at random intervals, especially at night. The cries weren't panicked, more like a call. Long, low, soft. Her foster mother had tried everything, lullabies, toys, even warm baths. But nothing soothed her like one unexpected thing, a recording. It started when a volunteer therapist brought in a sound machine loaded with forest noises. Wind in the trees, owls, distant rivers, and then by accident, a low-frequency rumble, an actual field recording of a grizzly's chest vibration. Ellie went quiet. Her breathing steadied. She stared at the speaker like she recognized it. That was the first clue. A week later, they tried another recording, this time of Thunder himself. A mic had picked up one of his soft vocalizations during treatment. Sam had saved it. They played it back through a small speaker. Ellie turned toward the sound, reached out, and smiled. It was the first real smile she'd given since the canyon. Words spread quickly. First to Jenna, then Sam, then the entire team. "She remembers him," Jenna said. Sam nodded, not with words, but with her body, her nervous system, her wiring. It's there. This wasn't myth. It wasn't fantasy. It was neurology. Studies in infant development have shown that sensory memories form early, far earlier than most people believe. Scent, tone, warmth, rhythm. These become signals of safety even before language exists. And in the absence of a biological parent, Ellie's body had turned to the only constant she'd had in those crucial hours. A grizzly bear. The idea came cautiously. At first, it seemed absurd, reuniting a human infant with a wild animal. There were risks, legal concerns, ethical debates, but Jenna pushed. "We're not putting her in a cage with him," she said. "We're not asking the bear to babysit. We're talking about a controlled, distant, monitored encounter. Just a moment, a signal, a goodbye, or maybe something else." It took weeks of discussions, meetings with child services, medical specialists, and state officials. Everyone weighed in. Most said no. But a few, the ones who'd seen the baby respond to Thunder's sounds, said yes. So they drafted a plan. The reunion would take place at a controlled observation site near Thunder's recovery range, a safe enclosure for Ellie and her medical team, a separate open habitat for Thunder. Nothing forced, no direct contact, just visibility, sound, and time. If either showed distress, it would end immediately. But if they didn't, the day arrived quietly. No cameras, no press. Just Jenna, Sam, Ellie's medical team, and a court-appointed observer. The site was calm, set into a grove of pine and meadow. Birds flitted between trees. The sun was soft warm. Thunder had been fed early that morning. He'd paced a little after, then settled under a large spruce. He didn't know what was coming, but something in the air seemed to make him restless, alert. When the SUV pulled in, Ellie was sleeping. She stirred when they transferred her into the shaded play area. Open-air, temperature-controlled, full of familiar textures. Blankets, plush animals, her favorite bottle. Then gently, the team moved the partition. From across a small glen, Thunder saw her. At first, he didn't react. He sniffed, lifted his head, stood. He took a few slow steps forward. No growls, no huffing, just interest. Then Ellie opened her eyes. She blinked, adjusted, and saw him. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. She smiled. And then, for the first time since leaving the canyon, she laughed. A soft, surprised giggle. Pure, instinctual. Thunder stopped walking, lowered his massive head. His eyes locked on hers. Then he made the sound. The same one he'd made when he curled around her. A low, pulsing chest sound. Not a roar, not a growl. A comfort, a memory. Ellie responded with a coo, then a wave. Tiny fingers reaching toward the space between them. The glen was silent. No one moved, no one spoke, because something unspeakable was unfolding. The encounter lasted less than 10 minutes. Thunder sat, then lay down. Not curled or defensive, just still. Watching. Breathing. Every so often he would make that soft sound again. Ellie mirrored him. Not with sound, but with presence. Her tiny body pressed against the fence closest to him. No fear, only familiarity. Then gently, Jenna gave the signal. The curtain came down. The glen faded. Thunder didn't move right away. He stayed in place for another hour, then stood, looked once more toward where the baby had been, and walked back into the trees. No distress, no pacing, just peace. Later that day, Jenna asked the pediatric neurologist a simple question. Was that safe? He nodded. As safe as anything truly human ever is? He paused. And probably more healing than anything we could have done with medicine. The small lesson here is about recognition, not the kind that needs names or language, but the kind that lives in the nervous system, the kind that says, "You protected me. You made me feel safe." That kind of bond doesn't vanish, and sometimes it can't be replaced. The fresh perspective is this: healing isn't always about moving on. Sometimes it's about circling back just long enough to close the loop, just long enough to feel that the bond didn't vanish. It simply changed shape. Ellie didn't need to be raised by Thunder. She didn't need daily visits or wild adventures. She just needed to know he was still out there, and he needed to know she was okay. That single moment between them did what months of therapy couldn't. Ellie began eating better, sleeping through the night. Her cries lessened. Her laughter returned. It wasn't magic. It was my memory. And in the quietest corner of Montana, a girl and a bear had reminded everyone watching that bonds don't always obey biology. Sometimes they just obey love. After the encounter, the team began sketching a long-term idea, a hybrid wildlife sanctuary and therapeutic facility. One that honors what happened, that lets other children, especially those recovering from trauma, encounter nature not as a threat, but as a place of memory of healing. They called it the Thunder Project. No one knows if Thunder will ever see Ellie again. Maybe that one moment was enough. Or maybe years from now, when she's old enough to understand, she'll return. Stand at the edge of the trees. Watch the mountains. And remember, years passed. Thunder no longer wore a tracking collar. He no longer needed one. His territory remained within a few miles of the same alpine meadow where he had once stood guard over a helpless infant. He roamed when he wanted, returned when he chose. But he never wandered far. The sanctuary team learned his rhythm. From spring to early fall, he stayed close. Winters, he hibernated deep in the pine-covered slopes above the valley, where wind carved the snow like glass. And every summer, as the grass returned and the rivers thinned into creeks, Thunder did the same thing. He came back to the edge of the grove. The same place where Ellie had smiled at him, where memory still lingered. Ellie, now a child with sturdy legs and a curious mind, grew up knowing his story. Not from the headlines, not from the viral videos that still floated online, but from the people who had been there. From Jenna, who stayed on as lead veterinarian. From Sam, who became something of a surrogate aunt. From the sanctuary staff, who had slowly turned Thunder's story into something more than a miracle. A movement. They didn't treat Thunder like a pet. They didn't romanticize him. They respected him as a wild animal, as a protector, and as a presence. And in return, Thunder gave them something rare: stillness. The kind of stillness that comes only from deep knowing. From having faced death, made a decision, and lived with it. He had once protected a human child. That truth would never be erased. And it had changed everyone who witnessed it. The lessons came in layers. For the wildlife rescue community, Thunder forced a new conversation about animal intelligence, behavior, and interspecies empathy. Biologists cited his case in studies on mammalian response to infant distress. His protective behavior was analyzed alongside famous cases: the gorilla Binti Jua, the elephant who shielded a fallen zookeeper, the dog who lay by a soldier's grave for years. And still, Thunder's actions stood apart, not because they were more dramatic, but because they were a choice. He had no obligation to stay. He stayed anyway. For child development specialists, Ellie's recovery told a different story. Her early exposure to the wild, to rhythm, heat, vibration, instinct, left an imprint. She grew up with a rare emotional intuition. At age 6, she asked if she could plant thank you trees for Thunder. She planted 3, and every year she added a new one. By age 8, she was asking questions most adults struggle to answer. Why did he stay when it hurt? Do you think he knew I was a baby? What makes someone a family? Those questions became part of a school program. The sanctuary developed. Wild bonds where children learned not just about bears or wildlife rescue, but about kindness, about what it means to protect something even when no one is watching. The key word wasn't just wildlife, it was a connection. For the rest of us, those who watched from a distance, who read or listened or shared the lesson, went deeper. Thunder reminded us that guardianship isn't about titles. It's not about who you're related to. It's about presence. It's about what you do when someone else is vulnerable. A wild grizzly bear injured and alone did something many people struggle to do. He stayed. He protected. He expected nothing in return. He became, in every sense, a guardian. Not by instinct, but by will. Some say animals don't love. But love isn't always soft. It's not always cuddles and warmth and gentle looks. Sometimes love is a 600-pound grizzly refusing to leave your side even as he bleeds. Sometimes it's watching the sky long after the helicopter's gone. Sometimes it's staying still when your entire body tells you to run. Love can live in fur and teeth and muscle just as much as it lives in words and hands. Thunder proved that. The Thunder Project continued to grow. It expanded to include rescued black bears, orphaned cubs, and a new education center for kids. But the heart of it all remained the same one story. One impossible act. One bear who had become something more than legend. Not because he wanted fame, but because when it mattered, he chose to be more than what the world expected. That choice, that one moment in the wild, sparked a ripple that touched science education, parenting, and policy. Wildlife protections were strengthened in the region. Wilderness rescue training now includes trauma awareness for both humans and animals. And perhaps most meaningfully, Ellie's case inspired lawmakers to revisit child abandonment statutes to include protections for parents in crisis and support, rather than punishment for those trying to escape danger. Because what had begun as one mother's desperate mistake, one bear's protective stand, and one child's silent cry, had grown into something that challenged everything we thought we knew about instinct, survival, and compassion. The story doesn't need a grand ending. Thunder still walks the ridge. Ellie still watches for him from the field. Sometimes at sunset they see each other from across the meadow. They don't wave. He doesn't approach. She doesn't run. They just exist together at a respectful distance. But there's something sacred in that space. A knowing, a thank you, a memory that no one can touch. And maybe that's the final lesson, that love, real love, isn't about possession. It's not about holding on. It's about showing up when it matters most. Staying when you're needed. Walking away when it's time. And trusting that the bond remains. Even if it's silent. Even if it's wild. Even if it's from a species that doesn't speak our language. Because maybe the most powerful form of guardianship isn't the kind that comes with obligation. It's the kind that comes from choice. So now, I ask you, who or what have you ever protected? Have you stayed when it would have been easier to leave? Have you ever been someone's shelter just by showing up? And maybe more importantly, has anyone ever done that for you? Let this story remind you that even in a world that feels cold, rushed, and disconnected, there are still wild souls who choose compassion, who chooses to protect, who choose to love even across species, across silence, across every barrier we thought was unbreakable. If thunder could do that without words, without thanks and fear, what could we do if we simply tried? If this story moved you, helped you remember something true, or made you see wildlife or love in a new light, take a moment, like this video, subscribe to the channel for more stories that restore your faith, and share this with someone who needs to be reminded. You don't have to be perfect to be a protector. You just have to stay.